Hi, and welcome to Apes and Pants with me, Sean Coffey, and Chris Brennan. Thanks for joining us as we explore the whys and wherefores of human behavior. For more information on this episode and to learn more about what we do, visit us at adultacademy.org/apes and pants. Chris, what are we doing today?
Sean, we're going to focus on one question. How can we respect people's agency while expecting them to respect ours? Stick with us.
It is now time for Apes in Pants.
So it seems ditching teenage fantasy means ditching all your dreams. All your friends and peers and family solemnly tell you you will have to grow up, be an adult, yeah, be bored and unfulfilled. Oh, but no one's yet explained to me exactly what's so great about saving 50 years away on something that you hate. Look at me, shuffling down the path of mediocrity. But if that's your road, then take it, but it's not the road for me.
Apes and
Won't
Pants.
sit down and won't shut up. And most of all, I will not grow up.
Agency is a word that doesn't get used often unless we're talking about governmental agencies. When we talk about people's agency, what do you mean? How is that defined?
All right. So an agent is any individual who can act in furtherance of motives or desires in a willful way. So we're not talking about something that's simply instinctual behavior. It's not just responding implicitly to the environment. If somebody jumps out from around the corner and says, boo, and I startle flinch, that's not an act of agency. That's an instinctual response. Instead, what we're talking about is people intentionally influencing their own lives.
That's kind of deep. That's free will, essentially.
So I think that there's an important distinction to make. Free will is kind of a messy concept, right? It's wrapped up in a lot of metaphysical notions that free will is something that we have been given by a supernatural deity. And that may be part of someone's worldview, but it's not part of everyone's worldview. But more importantly, it still takes some of the responsibility, or I shouldn't say the responsibility, it takes some of the focus off of what we know about ourselves as evolved creatures, right? So in addition to this whole metaphysical notion, we also have a pretty fierce debate between the neuroscience community and the philosophy community as to just how much we could say people have free will if we also live in a deterministic universe. There's some really interesting stuff in that conversation, I think, if what you're interested in is a pretty deep conversation about, human agency and human free will. But at the end of the day, I think so much of that comes down to sort of a sectarian perspective taking within academia as far as where are we going to fall down on the determinism sort of side of the line. How much of what we do is determined by outside causal forces. If we step away from that, sort of minefield of free will and just start talking about agency, well, now we start talking about the concept of human intention in a way that allows for us to recognize that we are part of a deterministic world. We're part of a world where outside things influence us, but at the same time, we still can exert willful behavior.
So let's go back to determinism. Can you, I don't know, maybe I'm lost today. Maybe I don't know how this is going to work out. Define that determinism. What?
Yeah, sure.
How does that get beyond the, or how does that relate to the deity thing? How does that all come in?
Okay, so I think that the important thing when we start talking about the notion of any sort of metaphysical system is, to a certain extent, we accept that everyone has one and that none of them are provable. There is no way to prove if your God exists and mine doesn't. So to focus in that part of the conversation sets us up for a pretty big divide that we can't find answers to. It's simply a tribal thing that divides us in a lot of ways. If we take it, though, to the notion of determinism as in a broad sweeping thing, right? Determinism is the idea that everything happens because of a reason. And that's a true statement, right? That does not mean that everything happens because of an outside intention, simply that we live in a world where causality happens in a chain. Things don't appear wholly out of nothing. So, for instance, this water bottle is not going to be emptied unless somebody picks it up and pours it out, or unless it gets knocked over, or some outside effect has to come in for that water bottle to be emptied. So it being emptied is a deterministic thing. We can determine the causes that got it to be emptied.
It's a good spot to pause because I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. I sat back on this one a lot, and I don't know. This one is. I don't know. For me, I guess I feel like it's pretty deep.
Well, it is pretty deep. I mean, it's a deep concept,
Yeah.
and I mean, I think it's certainly one that we can spend a lot of time on. We could spend an entire hour talking about free will and determinism and only scratch the surface of that conversation. It's a topic that's been part of philosophy, psychology, now neuroscience for literally hundreds of years, which is why I think it's important to distinguish agency from the free will debate.
So agency is probably broken down to, obviously at the individual level, but even more so where is it a plan? Is it, how do you act? How do you influence your own life?
Sure.
Because I think that's what we're getting down to, right? Is just how are we going to influence our own lives?
Yeah.
Separating.
So let's take the word agency now, right? So we talked a little bit about this notion of free will, and that a lot of times the first thing that people come to is the idea of free will. And even just I don't know what to do with that sort of moment. That's the problem with engaging with the conversation from a free will perspective.
Well, and I'm already underneath all of this. I'm running through 50 different things in my mind.
Yeah.
Wait, hold on a second.
Right. And that's why I think that distinguishing agency from free will is important, because the free will debate it's a conversation, it's a debate that has a lot wrapped around it. Conversely, if we talk about agency as the ability to act willfully and with intention to change the conditions in our own lives, well, that's something that's very clear, right? I can get up and go take a shower right now. That is an agentic act. I, as an agent, have chosen to get up and go take a shower, right? I have a motive, and I undertake an action to accomplish something in my world. So that gets us into sort of like the notion of what agency is. And Albert Bandura was a psychologist at Stanford, and his central thesis is that there's 4 properties of human agency: intentionality, forethought, self-reactiveness, and self-reflectiveness. So let me detail those out just a little bit here, right? So intentionality is that we come up with plans and we come up with strategies for accomplishing them, right? So if my plan, breaking this down to a very simple thing, if my intention is to go take a shower, well, then I come up with action steps to do that. I'm not just going to sit here and wait for the shower to happen. I know that I have to get up and go to the shower and go through the process of taking a shower. So that's part of it, right, is this intentionality. The second thing is forethought. Sometimes you hear the term, and again, this starts to get a little bit fancier. Forethought's the one we're going to stick with. But anticipatory self-guidance. Basically, forethought is us looking into the future, right? It's where we anticipate the outcomes of our behaviors in advance and adjust our plans to help us reach our intentions. So kids are great for intention with little forethought. They have a plan sometimes. They have a goal. Sometimes they have a plan. But they haven't thought about how that plan may break down or how that plan may not work in relation to the world that they're in. So what happens then is that we're seeing in our kids, and this is the natural state of things, right? We have to teach them agency. Their default starting position is that they will evolve intentionality. They will, over time, evolve forethought, self-reactiveness, and self-reflectiveness. But those things take experience, they take learning. So that self-reactiveness concept, that's our ability to regulate our actions to achieve our intentions. So what's that? That is, I want to lose 10 pounds, I'm not going to eat the cupcake. My plan is to lose 10 pounds. My intention is to lose 10 pounds. My forethought is, if there are cupcakes around, I will not lose the 10 pounds. So I may set my plan in such a way where there are no cupcakes in the house. And yet at some point I am going to come upon a cupcake. My self-reactiveness is my regulation. It's me not eating the cupcake. It's me recognizing that I have an intention that is beyond my immediate gratification. So forethought is wargaming what is going to happen in the world around us, and self-reactiveness is regulating our actions in the moment. One is that anticipatory phase, what might go wrong, and one is, how do I handle it right now? And then the last one that we deal with in this sort of the properties of human agency is self-reflectiveness, right? This is the let me sit back and think about what I'm thinking about. Let me sit back and think about my intention, the forethought that I've been putting into this, my self-regulation, my self-reactiveness, and evaluate how effectively and how efficiently I'm going about achieving my intentions. And then with that process of reflection, I can assess, am I moving towards my intention? Am I failing to move towards my intention? Am I moving towards my intention, but my intention is no longer what I really want? I've through the course of time, I've come to a new perspective that I want to do something different. Self-reflection is how we do that.
You know, you had said something earlier during this, the 4 properties of human agency, and talking about forethought, where you, and maybe what I'm going to say is closer to self-reflectiveness. Maybe it's kind of the same thing. Last week we talked about empathy.
Yeah.
And some of its importance, why, how we develop it and whatnot. One thing that came up was talking about your reaction in a car. Why did that guy cut me off? And I guess I'm thinking of that as forethought, where before those words come out of my mouth and I'm getting ready to go on I'm calling this guy something I shouldn't be. The child is in the back seat and I have to stop just long enough to go, should she learn that word now? And is this the right context? So, why, as it relates to agency, or I'm sorry, as it relates to empathy going forward, what is the big deal about agency?
Okay, so empathy, I think, is, to a certain extent, something that we are a little bit holding in tension with agency. Right? Because if we are purely empathetic, if we are only looking at the world from the perspective of others, then we are denying to a degree the importance of our own agency. the value of our agency, the value of our self-directed aims and goals. So from the forethought perspective, if my intention is to engage in the world in such a way where I am living these core values of empathy, agency, mutual aid, self-reliance, resilience, and kindness, then part of forethought is, before I ever leave the house, thinking about, okay, how do I get these two things to interface? How do I get what is essentially what can be a wholly selfless position, being empathetic in its extreme, and a wholly selfish position, being wholly agenic in its extreme? How do I hold those in balance?
Well,
so that's where the forethought comes in.
Okay, so if you're going to hold those in balance, what is the balance? Is the balance between you yourself and the world, or is it, how is it broken down? What are the two sides to this? I mean, we can be concerned of our own, but how is it then going to build a little bit larger and be productive outside of our own for a group, a tribe, family?
Well, okay, so first thing is you are a model. Okay? You are a model and an influence on everyone you interact with. And, it's the old idea that, no man is useless. He can at least serve as a bad example. No matter what, the conduct, the character, the ethos that you exhibit is a model for the people around you. It's the idea of, this is why you'll hear people say that, you're the average of the 5 people that you associate with the most.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, there have been times in my life where that was a dangerous proposition. But, so the idea here is that we have to recognize that we're not exclusively autonomous agents, right? We are not exclusively moving in a world where we are the only one that exists and the only one with agency. We are moving in a world with another 7 billion people who, if they are able to live their lives to the fullest, will be expressing their own agency. So it matters. Agency matters because we need to acknowledge that both our individual agency and our collective agency need to be held in balance. If my individual agency, if my individual intentionality is the only thing that matters to me, then I will run over people to achieve my aims. We see the results of that on a very regular basis in the world. And it's shitty. I mean, there's no other way to say it. It's shitty behavior. These are the people that you look at and tell your children not to be like, are people who are 100% exclusively agenic. So we have to hold our own self-interests, which are important, in some sort of balance or tension with the needs of the greater whole. Empathy is a way of doing that because it is a check. It is a check that uses our natural human inclinations to try to understand the perspective of another, to see why they have the intentions they do, why they want to pursue the aims that they do, and then evaluate whether or not we feel that their aims are compatible with our own, or if we can make room for their aims. So let's just talk about this project for a second. Let's just talk about the Adult Academy project, the Apes and Pants project. Both of our wives probably have intentions in their lives that would be more easily fulfilled if you and I had not just sat down and started a new business. Because by doing so, we are now committing not only time, mostly it's time, but
resources, money.
resources. We're committing resources that otherwise could have been invested in other things. So their acceptance of our agenic choice to do this is an example of holding those two agencies in balance. Them recognizing this is important work. This is work that we think is valuable, and this is work that we think that these two guys that we need in other parts of our lives, we think them investing the resources are worthwhile. That doesn't mean that it's still not getting in the way of something else that they would have done with those resources had it been wholly on their agency.
So unless you straight up ask them, they almost would have had to have done this. And I know that there was some talk. This wasn't, done right now. But they really would have had to have almost had a very, without even knowing that they were doing it, that they took on the 4 properties, that they intention, forethought, and maybe they didn't get as far as the self-reflectiveness. I mean, I may ask Marianne tonight, what did you think? Did you just think, all right, get him out of my hair? Why did you think this was important? What drove her to ultimately, as my partner, say yes?
Yeah.
I'd be curious to know.
Yeah, well, and so that's, yes. Both of them went through all 4 of those steps in some form or fashion. The thing with something like a psychological set of behaviors is that very rarely do we use them as a checklist. Often, what the model is describing is something that we are doing naturally. So it's not that we're norming our behavior to the model, because if it's a good model, and I think that the intentionality, forethought, self-regulation, self-reflectiveness model is a good one because it explains reality. It doesn't tell us what to do, it tells us what we do. And once we have a model that tells us what we do already, then we can use it as a tool to shape our behavior in the world, right? So in the case of our wives recognizing the importance of our agency, right? That's something that we do all the time with people. The key, I think, if we are looking to make the world a better place in general, right? A place where these values that we're talking about are abundant. I think that what we need to do is recognize that sort of willingness to accept the agency of another has to start to extend beyond the person whose laundry you're going to fold and put away.
So how do we teach agency? Plain and simple. How do we do it?
Well, like anything else, we start by saying that it matters, and then we start giving out choices. So let's take, I'm gonna go through sort of how I've done it with my son. When he was very young, I mean, from the time he was walking, I created situations in which he had to make decisions where I didn't say, go put on the yellow sweater. I wasn't looking for compliance. I said, go pick out a sweater. And in having to make a choice, he saw that he had influence over his world. He had influence over the outcomes of his world. And then there were plenty of times where he would say, I don't want a sweater. Okay. Now, you as the parent need to be aware of what the outer boundaries of safety are when somebody says, I don't want a sweater.
Because he's not going to wear shorts in December. Or maybe he did.
He has a buddy who I think I've seen the kid in pants 3 times. And my constant joke with the kid is, nice coat. I've never seen the kid wear a coat. Ever. The heaviest thing I've ever seen him wear on a scout hike was a sweatshirt while it was snowing. But here's the thing. His parents figured out that he wasn't going to freeze to death. We say, go put on a sweater. And the kid says, I don't want to put on a sweater. Well, now we have a choice. Do we interpret this as an opportunity for them to develop agency and learn from their choices? Or do we get hung up on the fact that they didn't do what we told them to do?
We're looking at it as an act of defiance,
right?
Focused on the negative, not saying, well, maybe. And maybe he's built the way he's built.
Right.
I know this. Maddie, much the way I am, she's hot all the time.
Yeah.
And this is going to, of course, come up when she's 13, 14, where, sorry, kid, you're going to have to wear a shirt. But now, when she's in the house, she likes to be down to basically what I'm wearing, which is underwear. So I'm a nudist. She's a nudist. It drives Mary Ann nuts because, go put on a tank. You've got to do this. Maddie looks at me and says, I don't want to wear the tank. I'm hot. And so then we're getting better about it. But, very early on, I would defend Maddie and wrongly I would do it in front of Maddie. And I would say something to Mary Ann about it, on and on and on and on. Now it's just come down to, I think Mary Ann realizes, you kind of know what kind of kid you have, whether it's, she's going to wear what she's going to wear. She's going to pick whatever snack she's going to pick. You have an idea of what kind of kid you have and what you can do with them.
Sure. Yeah. If you're open to that.
Yeah.
If you're open to allowing them to behave with agency. If you're open to allowing them to say, if you're comfortable with the fact that no child is going to starve themselves to death, no child is going to freeze to death. If they have access to the resources to prevent these two things, you know what's going to happen when they get cold? The same thing that happens when you get cold. They're going to go put on a sweater. You know what's going to happen if the kid refuses to eat and refuses to eat and refuses to eat? Beyond some very extreme cases, they're going to get hungry and they're going to eat. I spent about 2 years working in the fire alarm office for the city of Chicago before I got into firefighting as my career full time. Every single day, without fail, you would get a call for a cat stuck in a tree. And my stock response was, have you ever seen a cat skeleton in a tree?
And how did that go
You know
over?
why not? Because they come down. If the cat got up there, the cat can get down. When the cat gets hungry, the cat will come down. If the kid is hungry, the kid will eat. If the kid gets cold, they're going to put on a sweater. So is it about their health and wellness? Or is it about you wanting them to do what you told them to do? And here's the thing. Yes, there are times that we need compliance. In teaching our kids how to balance their agency with, there are times I need you to do what I'm telling you to do because I am your parent and I have more forethought than you. Well, that's a conversation. If you default to what we talked about last week of do it because I said so, they've learned nothing other than to resent you on some level. If the conversation is, listen, it's cold. We're going to be outside. At some point, you are going to get cold. And I don't want to give up my coat, which is what's going to happen. because I'm not going to let you freeze to death out here. So, you can either go grab a sweater. I don't care if you put it on. Bring it with you. Just have it with you in case you get cold. Give them options. So, in the same vein, teachers can do this. My kid's teachers he's had some phenomenal teachers, and he's been in some great school districts. I've been very, very fortunate that he's been in good districts. As far back as 5th grade, maybe earlier, one of the things that his teachers would do was that they would give out homework for the week. They wouldn't give out homework on Tuesday to be due on Wednesday. They would give out homework for the week that was covering the material for the week or part of a broader unit or whatever. And what they would give them was a tic-tac-toe board. So there were 9 assignments. They had to pick 3 in a row. The teacher provided a way for the kid to exert some agency by choosing what assignments they were going to do, and provided options so that that kid could gravitate towards things that were interesting to them, so that rather than it just being a cudgel, it was a tool. And does that mean that the teacher has more work to do? Yup. Absolutely. It's more effort to put that together to begin with, and it's way more effort than going through with one rubric and checking boxes after the assignment gets turned in. But at the end of the day, what you have is kids that are invested in their own learning. And they're developing their own agency. Growing the agency in somebody else isn't easy. We've mentioned this once or twice before. We're probably going to mention it once or twice again. Parenting, teaching, and mentoring isn't supposed to be easy. It's not supposed to be easy. It is supposed to be an effortful process. And if we invest the effort, what we get are the results of that effort. We get kids who are able to make choices in the world. I've also known kids that didn't have to make a single choice. Forget didn't have to. Weren't allowed to make a single choice for themselves until they were 18. And then their parents said, well, now you're an adult, figure it out. You've just set your kid up for failure.
I can't even wrap my mind around that.
I'm like, you better have something to say here, dude. I could keep talking for hours, and these people are all going to go to sleep.
Because join us next week. I feel like on some levels, I know this. I was horrible with money. Was never taught how to handle it, what to do with it, save, needs versus wants, whatever it was. I've had this conversation with my mom and dad before, and I tease my dad a little bit because I would say something along the lines of, I learned how to do math by way of how many beers he could buy at Baldy's, the local bar, with how much money I was asking him for. Dad, can I get $5 to go to the show? And he would turn to me and say, you know how many beers that would buy? And I would have to quick do the math. Well, 50 cents at $5. And I'm off and running with the number of beers he could get.
So he was teaching you division.
Yeah. And basically, go out and get a job, stand on your own 2 feet. I think my dad, and this is probably way off on a tangent, but I think my dad always knew what he wanted to do, didn't know how to do it. I think he had some intention behind it. I think he had enough forethought in there, but he never really got to the other 2 aspects of it. Now, as far as some sort of grading scale, I think I turned out okay. But I know it took me a long time to figure out how not to mess up money. And I think that's one thing that
I'm still no good at it.
I'm getting better. Of course, I'm getting better the longer I'm married.
Yeah.
But I know Marianne and I have talked about giving Maddie money somehow, some way, and letting her figure out what to do with it. And we actually just did it for her birthday this year. friends and family who have been invited and would bring her gifts. Some would just throw in $20. Well, we'd add up that total, and then we would match the total. This year, she had $80. So in the past, we would take that $80 plus $80 from us and put it in her savings account. She currently now has more money than I do. But this year we decided let her.
That was just with the first 80.
That first $20 that envelope hit. And the three of us sat down and said, hey, Maddie, here's what we used to do. What do you want to do with this now? And one thing that Marianne and I have always done for probably the last 4 years now is we have a little envelope system. And we label it, we put cash in it, and that's for whatever that envelope is set aside for. Maddie created her own envelope maybe about a month ago. And she wants to go to Cedar Point. She wants to go do the roller coasters. First words out of her mouth when I said, what do you want to do with that $80? She immediately wanted to put it in her envelope. And I'm not saying, that that's the end all be all, but I felt like a little bit of a winner at that point. Like, all right, giving her some power. She's now making what I think is an informed choice. She knew what we used to do with the money. She knows what she wants to do with the money, and she had no problem saying, I want to put it all in my envelope. And maybe the larger thing here is that little victory can add up to bigger ones.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it definitely starts early.
Yeah.
And at this age, I just feel like it was a great. And look, when we decided to have that conversation, it was right on the fly. We were writing down thank you notes, and it just, Marianne and I looked at each other like, hey, what do we do here? And we just kind of, without letting our own thought process get in the way, kind of succeeded by giving her a little bit.
Yeah, without your agency being the only one that mattered, you showed her that she also gets to be a force for exerting her own intentionality in the world. It drives me nuts when, I'll see parents that'll tell their kids to go, you got to go put on shoes that match. Why? Because you're afraid that some other human being that you don't even know in the grocery store is going to judge your parenting because your kid's got one red shoe on and one yellow shoe on. You know what that kid's learning? To be themselves. They're learning that they get to have choices. They're learning that that who they are is just fine. That's way more important than what some random primate that's going to pick up a copy of the Weekly World News thinks about the choices you're making.
That was a hell of a jab, by the way.
Well,
Apes and shorts.
Yeah. So I think what it comes down to is this. If we want our kids to be able to act in the world in such a way where they're able to accomplish their goals, and where they also recognize that they're not the only human being on the planet, we need to begin teaching them agency from a very young age. And we need to begin teaching them that how they exert their agency interplays with how others do. We start by teaching that within the family. And then they go to school and they have to learn how to start negotiating that within school. Timmy wants to do this and Billy wants to do this. And the worst thing that a parent or a teacher can do is step in and moderate that. Let Timmy and Billy figure it out. Because in the real world, that's what you have to do. You have to figure it out. You have to be given time to learn how to negotiate with somebody else and navigate their intentions and your intentions. That's why when you see kids' games being played that have no rules, like if they're not playing baseball, but they're just playing, free playing, it's this constant process of negotiation and renegotiation because they have to engage with one another empathetically. They're trying to exert their agency. They have to respect the agency of somebody else. And what does that end up doing? Bringing them into a place where they're helping one another. Might be that concept of mutual aid that we're going to talk about.
Sounds good. End it there. be done next week.
Next week. Mutual aid.
All right. We want to extend a big thanks to singer-songwriter and all-round awesome dude, Frank Turner, for the use of his song Photosynthesis as our theme song. Give it a listen. Check out the lyrics at Frank Turner. Start all over on that one.
Or at frank-turner.com.
Thanks, Chris. We have links up.
Mutual aid.
Yeah, thanks. We have links up where you can buy his songs on iTunes, Amazon. We have show notes up. If you purchase through Amazon, you also support this show. So please check out frank-turner.com.
And please subscribe to the podcast. You can find us on iTunes. You can find us on the Google Play Store. You can see the video version of this podcast on our YouTube channel. Sign up for our email list to get notifications of all of our new content. Share what we're doing here with your friends. You can find us at adultacademy.org, where all of our content is hosted. You can find us on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter. You can buy a t-shirt from our Teespring store. You can support us using the Amazon link in our menu bar. There's no more valuable resource any of us have than our time. Thanks for spending some of your time with us today. Cheers.